So the other day I came across the Black Friday sale on Steam, and one game caught my eye.
Definitely not because of the low price.
I had seen my friends playing it, so I thought, why not?
And so, I bought Assassin's Creed 2.
So, what exactly is Assassin's Creed? For those who don't know, Assassin's Creed is a big gaming franchise consisting of 12 main games, some side games, and even books. I've always wanted to try one, since the idea of stealthy assassins have always appealed to me since I was young. I wanted to start from the start of the story, so I went with the earliest one I could find, Assassin's Creed 2. So in this video, I'm going to talk about some of my opinions on the game, but these are just my personal opinions, so my taste might not be the same as yours. Plot. The story starts off with Desmond Miles, who is rescued from Abstergo and brought to a safe house, where he uses a device known as an Animus, which basically allows the user to relive the life of their ancestors, and it is such a realistic experience that you can even learn the skills that your ancestors used to possess. Through this, Desmond is trained to become an assassin. So, he goes into the life of his ancestor, Ezio Auditore da Firenze, and watches as he loses his father and brothers. As such, Ezio or Desmond sets out on a journey of revenge to avenge his father by traveling to different cities to assassinate and gain information on the one that caused his father's death. Without spoiling too much, I can say that the story is pretty good, but it was a bit hard for my slow brain to keep up with what was happening, and the relationship between the various characters was a bit complicated. The quests were slightly repetitive, with the pattern of killing small guards, and then slowly making your way into the building, and then proceeding to kill the boss, and then running away. I have to say though, the main character Ezio went through a big change from his playboy-like attitude to a serious, mature young man towards the end. His view on revenge also changed thanks to the various people that taught him the skills that he needed. So, character development on Ezio's part? 10 out of 10. Gameplay. The main selling point of this game is the assassination and stealth aspect of the game, which I did find very cool. The various weapons and tools at your disposal provide various ways of approaching a mission, which gives you some freedom to choose how stylish you want to make your mission. Personally, I like this freedom, but I felt that the game did force me to use the sword quite a bit. And honestly, I would have preferred to use the throwing knife, the unique Assassin's Creed knife. Or did I mention the freaking gun on your hand? Like, seriously, that's so cool. Can you imagine shooting a bullet from under your head without the opponent even knowing? Anyway, the sword fight, despite not exactly being what I was looking for, was definitely not lacking in content. There were so many ways you could fight: parry, dodge, counter-attack, and various different attack combos. There are even different ways to assassinate enemies, like hiding in a haystack and killing the enemy secretly, and then dragging them into a haystack to not arouse suspicion from people around you. Now, many people might say, wait a sec, what about the parkour? Oh, don't worry, I did not forget. That was literally one of the first mechanics introduced in the game. The parkour was, I gotta say, smooth, okay? The ledge catching, the running leaps, they were definitely a very essential part of the game. There's even this where you can leap from an extremely high place and land in a haystack, which is really useful if you don't want to take fall damage, and I gotta say, it's gotta be one of my favorite mechanics, because the feeling of leaping into the air and landing safely, and like, the process of falling is so thrilling. It was definitely worth climbing the high towers. However, one downside to the parkour though is that I cannot count, okay, how many times I've tried to leap to a ledge, only for the game's auto-target system to assume that I want to leap into empty air and land on the hard concrete ground below. This has definitely caused its fair share of frustration, but generally, the parkour was a really amazing aspect of the game. There were a few things that I felt would have been nice to include more on, such as the flying machines of Leonardo da Vinci, and I'm sure those who haven't played would have seen it somewhere before. And then there's also the carriage chase scene where you're supposed to ride a carriage and run away from opponents that are chasing you. I think there were more of these chase events in the non-canon side events of races, but I did not really bother to do those, so I kind of hope there would be more in the main quests. Graphics. Assassin's Creed 2 came out in 2009, and I have no idea how games then looked, because I didn't really play games back then. So I don't know how accurate my opinion will be, but here we go. The character features and facial expressions, gotta say, they surprised me. For a 2009 game, they really conveyed the emotions really accurately. However, compared to games now, I gotta say, you can definitely see the low poly difference. Most of the landscape was rather simplistic, but I was fine with that, since the houses were really well made, and you generally don't need to leave the city. The textures of the main character, Ezio, was really detailed. From the little symbols on his cloak to the weapons hidden on him, like the game never omitted little details, like the wind blowing up his cloak and the wet look of his clothes after going for a swim in the dirty waters of Venice in the 1400s. Difficulty. Honestly, the game wasn't that difficult. I was able to smoke my way through even though I hadn't really grasped the technique of sword fighting yet. I just kind of kept up the pressure on my opponents and somehow killed them while healing with medicine whenever I was hurt. So there were a few slightly difficult missions, such as there was a ship one, where there were many guards and you had to assassinate the main boss, protected by like 10 guards, without being noticed, by the way, and that is really hard. I spent close to like an hour trying to figure it out, and I eventually had to watch a tutorial. Unfortunately, it didn't really help much. So, on an extremely lucky run, I managed to do it. That was a pretty hard mission. Towards the end of the story, though, you start getting put in situations where the opponent's AI aren't as stupid anymore, and you actually have to use some strategies. One problem I did have with the game was the controls. I did think the controls were originally meant for console gaming. When I used PC, I didn't understand many of the symbols and had to keep checking the control settings. Even now, I still don't know what in the world this symbol means. Conclusion. Generally, I would say Assassin's Creed was a really interesting experience for one such as me who has never played any stealth games. It being old sometimes means that graphics weren't as amazing as the games nowadays, but they were definitely impressive. The plot wasn't anything particularly enticing to me, so that would drag down my impression of the game a bit, as lore is a big deal for me in such games. Generally though, a really cheap game for a really good experience and a ton of playtime. Like, I spent like more than 20 hours on this. Definitely worth a try if you don't mind the older graphics. 8.5 out of 10. If you feel there's anything I missed, do tell me in the comments down below. Like if you enjoyed and subscribe if you want to see more. Any advice is appreciated as this is my first video. Thank you and bye bye.